Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the webinar. As we wait for people to join the webinar, please let me ask you to mute yourselves. And we are going to watch a video about the global consensus statement of meaningful adolescent youth engagement. So if we could put video on. Thanks so much. So, welcome again to the webinar. I would like to thank you all for joining today to the webinar, Are You Walking the Talk? Assessing Our Progress on Meaningful Adolescent and Youth Engagement. For those of you who have just joined the webinar, please mute yourself. And we go through the webinar. Don't to put any questions that you may have in the chat box. My name is Jarandilla Nuñez. I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy of the International Youth Alliance for Family Planning, and I'm really excited to be moderating this webinar and this opportunity. This webinar is part of the Adolescent Health and Well webinar series organized by PMNCH, with a series of webinars that are taking place this month in commemoration of International Youth Day. But also is part of PMNCH, FP 2020, and IYAFP efforts to promote implementation of the Global Consensus Statement of Meaningful Adolescent and Youth Engagement. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send the link to all of you after the webinar in a follow-up email. With this webinar, we aim to follow up the discussions that we had in a webinar we hosted in February to talk about the idea of setting up an accountability system for the Global Consensus Statement. As a speaker for this webinar, we have Imbago, Sullivan, and Melles. And I'll be introducing them as they will speak. So to start with some brief background information about the Global Consensus Statement on Meaningful Adolescent and Youth. If you who haven't heard about the statement yet, or those who have just joined the community of signatories, let me introduce you to David, who will give some background about the statement. David, whenever you're ready.
Very much, Alan. David here from the International Youth Health Organization. I'm also a board member at PMNCH, representing the youth constituency. So yeah, the statement was this consensus statement was co-convened by the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health, PMNCH, also IYAFP, and Youth Family Planning 2020. Sorry, if when you join the call, please mute yourself so we don't have this background noise. Thank you very much. Sorry, I cannot see the screen anymore. Mimi, is it still being shared? Okay. So I was saying that the statement was a product that was created by PMNCH, IYAFP, and also FP 2020. So if we taking a look at this slide, we can see that before the AIDS conference in 2018, there were a series of consultations that took place that involved more than 30 youth-led organizations and youth-serving organizations from all over the world. It includes also interviews with stakeholders who are deeply involved in meaningful youth engagement. And during the AIDS conference in 2018, there was the first consultation in person of the first draft that was done during this meeting in the Netherlands. After this, we had the launch of the statement, which was done during the International Conference for Family Planning in 2018 in Rwanda, and also in India during the PMNCH Partners Forum in December 2018. In between the launch of the statement and right now, which is the launch of the accountability system, we had also a webinar that Alan already mentioned it in February that wanted to give us an overview of what our signatories expected from the accountability system, and that we are releasing right today, celebrating International Youth Day. Slide, please, Mimi. Thank you. So the big question is, did you miss a chance to sign the statement? If you haven't, no, you have not. Right now, the statement is on the PMNCH website. You can take a look at the link that is on the slide here, or you can also just Google it, looking at meaningful youth engagement on PMNCH. You can take a look at the statement on Google. There is also a link for you to fill out a Google form where you will be able to sign the statement. So far, we have had 218 signatories to date, and we expect this number to increase over the next few months. Right now, we are on the launch of the accountability system, and that is what makes this statement different than others. Back to Alan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, David. I think that it's important for if you haven't heard about the statement yet, just log into the PMNCH website and download it. It's available in both English and French, and you can take a look at it. And if your organization hasn't endorsed it yet, you can definitely endorse it. If you, as David mentioned, we are presenting this webinar an initial proposal of the accountability system for this state. I just want to remind everyone one more time to please mute yourselves as you the webinar. So if we can go to the next slide, we are going to have like an overview of the proposal of the accountability system for the statement. Um, the accountability system is an initiative to track progress on the implementation of the global consensus statement on meaningful adolescent and youth engagement. Because we want partners not only to endorse it and have their logos on the statement, but also to implement it in programs, in their partnerships with organizations, and in their governance. So this accountability system is having main elements. First one is the reporting process.
Alan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we can't hear you very well. Could you adjust your microphone, perhaps?
Okay, is it better now?
Much better.
Okay, great. So as I was saying, the reporting process is the first component of the accountability system. We aim endorsing organizations to report every 12 months on the actions taken to implement the global consensus statement on meaningful adolescent and youth engagement, as well as successes and challenges in the process. For that to happen, a survey will be distributed to all endorsing organizations so they can have a tool in hand to report back on the actions that they have taken. And we are going to form a steering committee to lead on this reporting process. So let me explain more about what this steering committee will look like. So we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the steering committee for the reporting process will be a committee which will have 6 members, 3 representatives from youth-led organizations, and we to have 3 representatives from youth-serving organizations of different sizes, different scopes from different regions. They will serve for a period of 2 years, which will start in September this year and will end in August 2021. The mandate of this steering committee will be, first of all, to review the accountability system and finalize the reporting process, all the details of the reporting process, including the indicators framework that will be developed for this, and implementing the reporting process. It means providing individual recommendations as endorsing organizations submit the information and their reports, and evaluating the reporting process at the end. If we can go to the next slide. So with this webinar, we're launching the call for applications for steering committee members. If you or any other representative from your organization is willing to apply to become a member of the steering committee, we will email you all with more information about the application process. But here you can find a link for the application form. The application for this steering committee will be open till September 6th. So, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions with regards to the steering committee. You can find more information about the steering committee, including its terms of reference, in this application form. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, the second component of the ability system will be the experience and knowledge sharing platform. And basically, with this platform, interactive dialogues will be organized 3 times a year to create a space for endorsing organizations to share experiences, good practices, and also to discuss challenges implementing the consensus statement. And through the reports received in reporting other conversations that may happen. Meanwhile, key challenges and good practices will be identified and will be discussed and presented in these interactive presentations. And through this platform, we also aim to share new and existing resources of meaningful adolescent and youth engagement to facilitate knowledge sharing community. For this, the Meaningful Adolescent and Youth Engagement Statement website, which is hosted under the PMNCH website, will be updated with information on this process on a regular basis. And third component, which is yet to be developed, is an organizational assessment working group, which will the implementation of in-depth assessments for organizations that can opt for this. Yes, I think that we go to the next slide, and I am happy to hand over to Emily, who will give us. Oh no.
That's right, Alan. This works.
To Mimit, who will provide us more information with regards to experiences, meaningful adolescent and youth engagement assessments.
Great, thanks, Alan. This is Emily from Family Planning 2020. All for joining today. The resources that you see here are from our partners at Youth Power. If you're not familiar with Youth Power, I would encourage you to go to this website. And as Alan said, the second component to the accountability structure we've built up with input from you all is around helping us all to learn more about what we can do to improve meaningful youth engagement in our work. These are just 4 examples of things that Youth Power has on their website, and we'll be partnering with them to make sure that when we do learning exchanges among those who have signed on to the statement and others, that we feature some of these works, the learning agenda, the strong evidence like a systematic review, measurement toolkit, and even possibly joining their community of practice. So this is for your all's reference. Thus far, we've had David from PMNCH's Adolescent and Youth Constituency give you background on the Global Consensus Statement, how it was developed, what it is, and letting you know that it's not too late to join if your organization has yet to do so. We're regularly adding on new logos and adding on additional people to the follow-up. And then Alan from IYAFP has walked us through the proposed accountability structure, which it really has 2 main parts. The first, as Alan mentioned in the previous slide, is about the survey that you should all be anticipating receiving by the end of the year to give us feedback on your progress. And then the second piece is this learning agenda. So Alan mentioned there's a third component that we have yet to fully develop. Go to the next slide. Great. So the third component is something that we're going to be figuring out how to do going forward. The 2 first elements are relatively straightforward, and we're happy to work with you all to implement the accountability survey and the learning agenda. But this third component of external assessments that can be conducted is something that we're hoping to help you all learn a little bit more about how to do. Both PMNCH and FP 2020 have decided to independently undergo external assessments, essentially looking back to see what kind of progress we've made on meaningful adolescent and youth engagement, because we know that our intentions are true, but reality matters more. And we also know that we can't move forward in a progressive, confident way about that we're doing good work unless we've looked back. So for FP 2020 in particular, we have had a focus on meaningful youth engagement for about 4 years now. And as we come to 2020, we figured this was an excellent time to look back. Why did we do an external assessment opposed to our own assessment? Because I know that the young people that I get the opportunity to work with would perhaps feel a little uncomfortable telling me that they didn't think that FP 2020 was doing the best that it could. So thankfully, we have created a partnership with Restless Development, and PMNCH created a partnership with the Swiss TPH to conduct external assessments. So we're sharing this with you today in hopes that some of the organizations on the line get inspired to do a similar in-depth external assessment. So we'll be showcasing to you some of the things that you could find out if you also decided to invest in an external assessment. So I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague at Restless Development, who was one of the consultants who put together the assessment. Victoria Farsgate, are you there on the line? Can you give us an overview of the external assessment that you conducted on FP 2020?
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly enough. As Emily said, my name is Victoria Farsgate. I actually used to work in Restless Development, but for the past few years I've been based in Jakarta, Indonesia, and got involved in this project with a fellow consultant, Rebecca Taylor, who's also on the line and listening in. So just a bit more background then, just building on what Emily said in the introduction. 2020 did significant experience focusing on you since 2015. They've undergone structure, they had launched a new strategy, had employed a new staff member for the first time that would focus on youth. So, over that
Sorry, I'm going to ask you to pause.
You.
Yes.
We cannot hear you. This is Daniel. We cannot hear you very well because there's a lot of background noise.
Yes. So we need everyone to mute themselves. We're having a hard time with the platform being able to mute people externally. So unless you are speaking, please, please, please do mute yourselves. It makes it very difficult for everyone else to hear. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Victoria, please proceed.
No worries, no worries. So, so 2016, since 2016, FP 2020 had really expanded its focus on youth. And then coincidentally at the moment is also undergoing another strategic review globally. So in some ways, this assessment on its meaningful youth engagement initiatives quite well timed. So, obviously Restless Development were committed to this. Rebecca and I led on the methodology, the data gathering, the write-up, but we worked very closely with Emily. There was a youth panel which was appointed through this process to be involved in the project as well, and I'll speak a bit more about their role, and Restless Development USA. What this assessment did was really focus on, as Emily was saying, how is meaningful youth engagement being operationalized? So having made the commitment, how far has FP 2020 managed to put meaningful youth engagement into action? And we were particularly looking at the work of the Global Secretariat. There are many, many stakeholders involved, but this assessment was mainly looking at what is under the control of the Global Secretariat in terms of the staff it has, how it operates, the interactions that it has with partners and members. And so the main areas within FP 2020 that we were looking at are there on the slide. So the first one was meaningful youth engagement in the organization structure and its global strategy. Secondly was around FP 2020's partnerships with youth-led organizations. And finally, how meaningful youth engagement is implemented through FP 2020's advocacy and communications. So those were the three main areas that we looked at. Obviously, there were many other things that we could have considered, but even that was very broad in the timing of the assessment. And we worked on the data gathering through kind of February this year until June. And the methodology itself was quite a familiar approach. So we included a desk review of documents, mainly documents that came from FP 2020. So a lot of internal documents, but also documents that had been available online. We carried out a number of semi-structured youth panel who were young professionals from Lesotho, Niger, and India did a lot of the bulk of those interviews. So we worked very closely with the youth panel on the questions. We ran training and orientation for the youth panel and did a lot of support kind of along the way to ensure that they felt confident carrying out those interviews and recording the data and sending it back to us. We also did a short online survey, which had a relatively good response rate for as surveys go. And then really importantly, we thought a lot about the actual frameworks that we would use to actually analyse the data that we gathered. As a result, we ended up focusing on the three that are listed in the slide. So we thought about, we want to, when we're doing the analysis and looking what was the data telling us, we want to really build on existing work out there on youth participation. So in particular, the flower of participation, which has been developed by Choice and UACT, was something that we looked at very closely. We also looked at principles of meaningful youth engagement, particularly as described in the global consensus that was spoken about earlier in the presentation, and from other best practice kind of approaches, including the flower of participation. So some of those principles were around it being rights-based, it being transparent, inclusive, etc. And then also we looked at power, and for that we used the framework of the Power Cube, which is something that was developed a few years ago, and looks at different aspects of power, different dimensions of power, because we really felt that meaningful youth engagement has to recognise and change power structures that prevent young people from being experts. Experts on their own needs, on their own priorities. And so if we didn't include that aspect of power in this assessment, then we really weren't doing justice to what, true meaningful youth participation looks like. Because participation in itself isn't enough if you're not also addressing power. So that's just a bit of a summary then on, what was the main focus of the presentation, of the assessment and the methodology. I'll just kind of I'll talk about the kind of the findings and assessments very briefly, but I will say that maybe some of the challenges with an assessment like this is that there had been no baseline. So this was the first time this had been done by 2020. We weren't measuring kind of the change or impact in very technical terms, but we were obviously looking for that kind of information. We weren't looking at individual meaningful youth engagement initiatives, so we weren't looking at a lot of detail of those. We didn't want to get too technical. We wanted something to come out of the report that was very practical. So in terms of the findings, you can see there that we looked specifically at kind of outcomes of participation, really important for youth and for criteria. Findings we grouped into four main areas. So, findings relating to criteria, then looking more at youth leadership at the country level, looking at how FP 2020 can strengthen youth movements more broadly, and in particular looking at evidence, learning and accountability, which is often forgotten about because it's hard to do, but it's really important. Can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. So the full set of recommendations is still in the process of being signed off, but the report itself is going to be publicly available, as I understand it. And maybe I would just wrap up by saying, of the many recommendations that came out of the report in the four areas that were on the previous slide, it became clear that this is time for a bolder agenda on youth for FP 2020, and we specifically listed how that we actually put into practice, that whilst they've done a lot of great work, that by sharpening the focus, particularly at the country level, could lead to greater impact in the future. And finally, more emphasis that there have been a lot of kind of adult-led and shared decisions with youth in the future, more emphasis on enabling youth to be self-directed, led organisations to be autonomous would be really important for FP 2020's work in the future. I think I'll stop there. In terms of what will happen next after this assessment, Emily, I'm sure can speak more to that. But yeah, look forward to, very happy to answer any questions at the end.
Okay, thank you so much, Victoria, for that overview of FP 2020's assessment. So let's go back to David, who will walk us through a similar experience of PMNCH.
Thank you very much, Alan. About PMNCH, I will first start with a brief introduction of what's the partnership for those who are not familiar with it. So the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health is a platform that includes governments, NGOs, academics, private sector, and the mandate of the partnership is to work on the systematic areas of the Every Woman, Every Child platform, and also universal health coverage. It is important also to know that one of the systematic areas of the Every Woman, Every Child movement or platform is adolescent health and well-being. So in 2015, a constituency was created that represents adolescents and youth. It is unique because it's the only constituency of PMNCH that represents a population. It includes also academics, it includes NGOs, grassroots activists, and many more. So it is quite unique, it is quite rich on what it represents, and sorry, and it's a platform for young people to be able to be represented in a global movement. PMNCH has 10 constituencies that you can see on the slide here. I will not mention them all, but if you want more information about the partnership, you can take a look at the website. As I said before, in 2015, PMNCH created the Adolescent and Youth constituency that I will be referring as AYC from now on. Mimi, can you next slide, please? Thank you very much. So as I said before, it is a very new constituency. Therefore, we wanted to know if it's working, it is not, what can we improve. So we conducted this independent assessment to evaluate the constituency. The primary objective of the assessment was focusing on achievements, challenges, meaningful engagement of AYC members within, across, and on adolescent and youth platforms, including PMNCH itself, lessons learned, and most important recommendations, including the way forward from now on based on this assessment. Next slide, please, Mimi. Thank you. So the Swiss TPH, which is the Tropical Public Health Institute assessment team, was hired to do this assessment. It's important also to mention that the team is composed of Dr. Adrian Martin, who is the team leader, also Dr. Leah from the Swiss TPH also. And what's most important for me is to say that it also includes 5 youth experts from the US, Switzerland, UK, Rwanda, Mexico, and Nepal, who work on this assessment. So the purpose of meaningful youth engagement was also included in this assessment process. This team uses an abbreviated SWOT approach, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to inform the assessment questions, with a particular focus on internal strengths and potential weaknesses to inform the key gaps to facilitate group learning. Based on these, on the recommendations that the assessment will be shared, they will be incorporated into the PMNCH work, also in the AYC work overall. It is also important to mention that these assessments could not be done without the support of the Children Investment Fund Foundation, which is a big supporter of the AYC, and I just wanted to publicly say that. Thank you very much, Steve. Next slide, please, Mimi. Thank you. The assessment question will covers all the aspects of the AYC work related to improving the health and well-being of adolescents, which is the primary objective of the constituency, and it includes 7 main points, which includes overall mission, vision, and approach, AYC strategy and sustainability, meaningful youth engagement and capacity building, advocacy, knowledge, evidence and skills, accountability, and finally, governance and structure. Next slide, please, Mimi. Thank you. About the methodology, the assessment includes a reference group that was established to oversee the assessment, including the development of the questions, the list of people who were interviewed, the virtual working group assembled, and overall the whole assessment in general. This assessment has 3 main points, which are first the document review, then we had depth interviews, and also an online survey. These 3 points were triangulated and are being triangulated, to be interpreted collectively to provide an holistic and contextualized analysis for grounded recommendations based on results. Right now, we are at this stage that the virtual working group is being convened right now to validate the results of the first draft report that was just shared this week. So we don't have the final results yet, but as soon as they are available, they will be shared widely, and they will be also incorporated into the work of the AYC and also into the work of PMNCH. It is also important to mention that in general, PMNCH is going through an external evaluation process also, and also the outcomes and the results of the AYC assessment will be also part of the external evaluation assessment process in general. We're at this stage right now, and as I said before, as soon as the results are validated and they are reviewed by the board and the leadership of the constituency, they will be shared with the audience in general. Thank you very much, Alan. Back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, David, for that overview. I think that Emily wanted to say something before we jump us to the next agenda item of this webinar.
That would be great. Thanks, Alan. So this is Emily again from FP 2020. And I just wanted to again emphasize that the reason that we shared these very high level findings and description of the methodology is not because they were tremendously detailed and you were going to gain a lot from the results necessarily, but rather to give you a general understanding of what could happen if yourself and your organization decided to invest in an external assessment of your meaningful youth engagement. So we encourage you to remain a part of the Global Consensus Statement community, be a part of the, respond to the survey for the accountability structure, be a part of the learning exchange, but then also to consider whether or not you want to go the extra distance to invest in something like this kind of external assessment. And as Alan mentioned earlier, we are actively figuring out how we can better equip some of the partners and signatories. As David mentioned, we have over 200 organizations that have signed on, and we know many of you aren't sure exactly how to do this. And a good first step, I think, is to actually assess what you've done thus far and the quality of the work you've done. That's what I wanted to say at the end of this. We have yet to receive any questions in the chat box, so I just wanted to encourage everyone, if you do have questions thus far, to insert those. So back to you, Alan, who's the main moderator. Thanks for letting me jump in.
Thank you, Emily, for that. Yeah, just another reminder, if you have any questions about any of the presentations so far, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat box. So let me introduce you to Mimi from PMNCH, who will be talking about some next steps on this. Mimi, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Alan. This is Mimi Melles-Brewer from PMNCH, working on the Adolescent Health and Wellbeing portfolio, and also the focal point to the adolescent and youth constituency. I'll be very brief because we would like to hear from you about how you feel about organization's approach to meaningful youth engagement and any questions or comments you have. But we would like to just highlight these 2 important next steps, so that we really work with you, that this is kind of a starting point for us to kind of collaborate together in the accountability system for this consensus statement. So one way is around being a shaper. you can actually engage in the oversight of this accountability system by applying to be a member of the steering committee. We've mentioned that the deadline is the 6th of September. You can have a look at the terms of reference and apply. And then the second step is, if assuming your organization has endorsed the statement, really making sure that we hold, you accountable as well, and that you join us in this effort to kind of collectively improve our engagement with adolescents and youth. So stay tuned for communication around this. We will be in touch, ways you can engage. So that's really exciting. And I'm going to come back, I think, for the wrap up, but we would like to hear questions, thoughts, any plans you have around youth engagement and how we can also support you, and also get your comments around the system that we're looking at, around reporting, around also, trying to encourage other organizations to conduct their own assessments around youth engagement. Really, I mean, we'll share a bit more around this, but it has been a really important checkpoint for us to formally strategize on how our platforms are really improving our engagement with young people, and really supporting you as young people, as leaders of change. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion and your thoughts. Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Emily, are there any questions so far in the chat box that you could monitor?
We don't currently have a question in the chat box, so I'm actually going to take the opportunity to call out a partner of ours who I see is on the line. Jesse from Youth Power, I am hoping that you would be, or others from Youth Power who are on the line, if you would be willing to talk a little bit about, what you would encourage those on the line to do as sort of a first step in trying to better understand what evidence exists out there on youth engagement. And maybe, Mimi, could we go back to the slide with the Youth Power resources? And I could ask Cassandra just to speak briefly about how to encourage others on the line to take that next step to improve their work in this area.
Thanks, Emily. I appreciate you giving us an opportunity to sort of share with you. And part of our goal around Youth Power Learning is to support how we best engage, interact with, and change and transform systems and societies, looking at communities, looking at families, and looking at individuals. And so one of the approaches that has really come to the fore as a strategies for being able to support and partner with young people is around positive youth development. And so that positive youth development sits at the core of a lot of the work that we do, and thinking about some of the research and evidence building that we've been engaging in. And so, as Emily has kindly shared and mentioned, we have done a fair bit of building around what we do know, and you can find some of that in the systematic review, and thinking about how do we measure that, and looking at measures that are out there in measuring constructs around positive youth development, and then even within that specifically around youth engagement. And we have a measurement toolkit that could help guide those of you that are doing programs, looking within your own organizations, to think about how to better support, engage, build the assets of, and the agency of young people to ensure full and transparent partnerships, and looking at the enabling environment in which young people are working and engaging, and that is transformed and supportive. And so we have a toolkit to be able to help at each of those levels. We also do have these communities of practice. We have 4 of them at present. The one most relevant, I think, to our youth engagement, and these there's a full range of the types of people that are there, from the donors to the academics to young people practitioners from the international NGO to the local youth-led or youth-serving organization. So sort of a full range of people engaged on that platform. From the gaps that we had is where the learning agenda. I'm excited to hear about the ways and the fact that FB 2020 and PMCH are really thinking about how to collect lessons, to collect those stories, because one of the big gaps in those of us, I'm kind of a full-fledged 40-something adult, and so I think helping to ensure that the strategy is grounded with youth, by youth, and in that full process, there's a lot that we don't know, that we haven't fully explored from an evidence-based side as well as a strategy side. So we're looking to organizations like yourself to be able to contribute to that learning. And so I really would invite you to learn more about the learning agenda. There is a resource I wanted to mention that's not on here, and it's new. It's a youth assessment tool. It's a youth assessment programming tool. And as you were talking about organizational capacity development, FHI 360 had developed this, and it's something that we've recently done a couple webinars around, but it's thinking about youth serving civil society organizations to really reflect their institutional practices, their internal programming, and looking at areas for improvement. So I would invite you to check out this tool and think about this as an opportunity for that reflection. So I wanted to throw that out there as something that's new, that's just out, that really could be useful in your own journey of how do we better ensure meaningful youth engagement and participation.
Perfect.
Emily, I'll let you ask if there's anything else you want to know from me.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Cassandra, for showcasing all these different items. And you also answered Josephine's question just now, which was around the methods and strategies to work with young people as a local NGO. And I think a lot of these resources here, Josephine, would help you to think through that a little bit more. And I'd also encourage you to, join the community of practice that Cassandra has laid out here, but also to stay tuned with this group to have further discussions. We didn't provide concrete examples today. That is very true. That was designed purposely that way because we are essentially launching the accountability piece of this. And in that process, in the accountability structure, we're going to be working more on what that sharing really looks like, and to give more concrete examples about methods and strategies. So I would take a look at those resources and then stay tuned with this group. Alan? Oh, go ahead.
Could I add one more that honestly, it's really remiss of me to not have mentioned already, is our newest platform, which is Youth Lead. And it's actually intended for young changemakers. So it's been developed with a large youth steering committee and is intentionally a place for young people to be able to engage with each other and thinking about posting your projects, your opportunities that you have, and for those that have different opportunities to be sharing them. And so thinking about exchanging ideas, exchanging resources, funding opportunities, and creating a space and community with young people who are working to and committed to change in their level across a variety of topics. So just wanted to mention youthlead.org as a really key space and a growing space for young people directly to engage.
Great. So that means for everyone else who's on the line asking about best practices, as well as the most common and effective indicators, I would again really encourage you to check out those links. We'll share the links in the follow-up to this webinar, so you can begin to explore those. And again, stay tuned for more in-depth discussions on the how aspect of all of this. Alan, I'm going to turn to you to answer two questions. One is around the terms of reference for the steering committee. Can you clarify if perhaps there was a small error saying that this September 2019 to August 2020, we're assuming that you may have meant 2021. And then also there's a second question about what the mechanism will be for sharing experiences and how we plan to go forward on this, or is this something that still needs to be worked through?
Okay, thanks so much, Emily, and thanks so much for those of you who have posted those questions. First of all, we'll make sure to review that TOR for the steering committee because it should say August 21. The steering committee term will be for 2 years, so it will start in September 2019 and go through August 2021. That's the first clarification I wanted to make. And as per the second question about the mechanism for sharing experiences, through the knowledge and experience sharing platform, we're going to organize at least 3 interactive dialogues per year. These interactive dialogues will be online interactive dialogues where we will be inviting some partners and the community of signatories of the statement to present some of their practices, to also facilitate discussions around the challenges that they are experiencing while engaging young people in their work. And so those will be the spaces for those experiences. We will announce way in advance when those interactive dialogues will take place so that partners can express interest in sharing those experiences, practices, and also challenges that they are facing. And isn't that in those interactive dialogues where those discussions will happen? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alan. I see a question that we have here from Lauren, which is, are there best practices to identify and connect with youth organizations, asking from a research organization perspective? Lauren, I can just answer from FP 2020's way of going about this, but I guess it depends on how you want to partner with young people. I would say that that's the most important thing to define within your organization itself. I know Russell's Development, for example, one of their most popular of all time youth engagement activities was helping to train young people to actually conduct research and contribute towards a body of evidence related to adolescent and youth issues. So I think that, as a research organization, that could possibly be one perspective or one way to connect with them. If you are unfamiliar with which youth-led organizations you could partner with, I don't know what areas of work you're working on, but on FP 2020's website, on our adolescent and youth page, we have about 400 plus youth-led organizations on a map, all which work on issues related to family planning and SRHR. For some of the other questions, there is a question specifically about effective indicators. Oh, sorry.
Emily, I was just piggyback off you with
Sure.
From PMNCH's perspective. I think from our side, because we work with a constituency that's very, very diverse. I mean, national, regional, global organizations coming from various communities, including young people most vulnerable. And, we have various projects and we work on, but it's really key to be very the who you want to engage and why, and what that requires from the side, because it's about making sure they have the resources and support, that kind of enabling environment to engage meaningfully. And so for us, because we also really feel like transparency is a very important principle in youth engagement as a constituency, that we have very specific selection criteria and terms of reference for young people to know exactly what the conditions and what's expected from their side, and what kind of support we're able to give them. So I think that is important from the very beginning, to be very explicit about how we're engaging them and for what purpose. treating them as professionals, because a lot of times with young people, they're often, expected to just volunteer or do whatever for free, and that's not acceptable. So that all has to be taken into consideration as well when you're planning projects. Those are just a couple things that came to mind.
Great, thanks, Mimi. So I think possibly for our last question, I will be going to Victoria. We have a question here about what are the most common and effective ways and different methodologies that one could use to evaluate meaningful youth engagement, and to what extent you're successful in actually meaningfully engaging young people. So what are the different types of indicators and different methodologies that one could use to measure the success of this project? Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you. That's a really great question. It's a very big question, and I suppose it would be very different if you were looking from a very program level, where you're looking more at activities. In this assessment, we were looking kind of zooming out much more and looking more at ways of working within the global partnership that weren't really looking at all at how is this program delivered to achieve a specific family planning goal in this country, but how are youth involved more generally in the design and the decision making of family planning policy and programs at a higher level. So I think the methodologies that we used, I felt on the whole worked well in the time that we had. I think it would be really interesting in the future to think about more of a longitudinal kind of study of this, as someone who's worked in the youth sector for a while, to see over time how these things have an impact. What was quite interesting about this review was looking at how FP 2020 could support future kind of growth, sustainability of advocacy and support for family planning by working with youth. And so, the methodology for that very much for us focused on, interviews and desk review, but it would be really interesting to be looking at this more on a regular basis, and potentially even coming back to the same people that you've interviewed. And what tends to happen in the youth sector is that you have people who start out at a very young age and do progress through and become advocates and move on to other organizations, and to see the investment that's made in supporting them to be engaged from the start, and then the impact they long term, I think would be really interesting. So for this assessment, I think the methodology we used that I described earlier worked well. Obviously, for a program evaluation, it would look very different, I suppose.
Great, thank you so much for that, Victoria. We're going to take one last question, which, Cassandra, should be relatively simple for you to answer, I believe, which is actually related to what Victoria was saying, that we don't have a lot of, other longitudinal, more long-term research looking into the impact of youth engagement. But Lynn has a question for you, Cassandra, around, is there anyone in the community of practice who's working on, on the follow-up from that systematic review, or more collecting evidence that could be used for future systematic reviews?
We are in the process of collecting evidence around that we've outlined in the learning agenda, one of which is that youth engagement, as I mentioned. So at the moment, if you go to youthpower.org section on the agenda, within that there's a sort of a microsite, and we've been posting evidence that people have either been sending us, so I highly encourage to you can send it to the info@youthpower.org or to me at Condra@youthpower.org. Anything around strategies for youth engagement, effectiveness, impact, and so we're in that process, and so there will be a lot cull through for some future systematic reviews. We are going to briefs later this year connected to each of the themes about what we have learned thus far and where that call of action needs to be as we're moving forward. And I really think that this community is a great one for being able to build that evidence and help all of us to do better.
Great. We can do better and we will do better. Thank you, Cassandra. We are going to wrap up now, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague Mimi at PMNCH to just do some final reminders before we close out. Mimi?
Yes, thanks, Emily. Yes, thanks everyone as well for joining this webinar. And, your comments and questions have been really engaging. As you can see, we have had a lot of interest in the consensus statement. We have over 215 organizations endorsing to date. So there is a lot of interest. And for those of you who haven't endorsed yet, we hope you can review this with your organization. Endorse as soon as possible because it is a rolling application. And, we want to continue mobilizing endorsements, whether you're a government, private sector, youth-led organization, or UN agency. So please check the PMNCH website to read more. And I thought I'd just mention that, from PMNCH's perspective, we know that youth engagement doesn't happen overnight. As David, explained about the adolescent and youth constituency, it's a fairly new platform for youth engagement in global health, and particularly adolescent health and well-being. And, just thinking back, we established this AY constituency in 2016. We now have 4 formal board seats, which is equivalent to the other 9 constituencies. A lot has happened since then. And this, assessment that we've recently developed has served as a checkpoint for us to really strategize on how CH can serve as a platform to meaningfully engage adolescents and youth. So for us, this is a learning opportunity to think forward-looking, to work better with young people, and to collaborate meaningfully in this multi-stakeholder platform where we have, private sector, governments, we have UN agencies engaged around women's, children's, and adolescent health. And I say this because, we're 3.5 years old, I guess, as a constituency, and it really has taken, dedicated time, resources, and staffing, but it is a process, and we are on a journey. And so I encourage your organization to also, conduct this organizational assessment as a starting point if you haven't already done something like this, because it is really interesting to kind of just look, talk to young people themselves along with other allies who work with young people on where you're at, and really think honestly and strategically on this. So we also from PMNCH side want to thank all the, maybe many of you have participated in our assessment through surveys, through interviews, etc. So really thank you for your contributions to that. And I'm sure FP 2020 feels the same related to their assessment. So yeah, this is something we're thinking through in terms of the third element of the accountability system, on how we can support you better to be able to conduct the assessment, whether it's through making just suggestions of what networks you could groups that you could work with who can provide this kind of expertise in other ways. So that's something we're developing. And finally, I just want to emphasize, that we really want to build on what is happening already, youth power and there's the youth lead resource hubs. So, we're not starting from scratch. We're really trying to come together as a community. And that's, with the support of PMNCH, FP 2020, IYAFP, and also Youth Power, Youth Lead, to kind of build this platform as a knowledge sharing space to work with all of you and to engage in these kind of discussions. And yeah, so we look forward to this kind of this conversation carrying on. We'll also be sharing the recording for this webinar. So for you haven't who would know of people who haven't been able to access this today, we ask you to please disseminate it widely to your various networks. And up next we have, because this is part of a webinar series, the next one on what the numbers say, understanding data for adolescent health and well-being. You know, there's a lot of interest around data and how this connects to advocacy and accountability, especially at country level. So that next Thursday. And then actually for those who are interested in meaningful engagement in GFF, Global Financing Facility country, that will be the following webinar. So, you know, obviously meaningful youth engagement can apply to different contexts and things. And so we have a very specific discussion on GFF, which we're looking forward to. So that is side. And I want to thank you again for participating. And we look forward to working with you and carrying this conversation on further. So on behalf of PMNCH, FP 2020, IYAFP, thanks again for joining this webinar.
Thank you all. Goodbye. Keep up the good work.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for joining. Bye.